The if function is a very important function in Excel, as it will allow you to control what gets displayed to the end user using your Excel spreadsheets. So it's important that we study and understand this function. Unlike the normal mathematical functions, it has more than one parameter that feeds in. So the syntax is equals if. All functions start with an equals. If is the name of the function, then we open brackets. The first part is then the evaluation criteria. So this evaluation section asks a question. Is A1 greater than 5? Is the sum of B5 to D10 greater than 3000? It asks a simple, straightforward question with two potential outcomes. That question is correct, therefore true, or that question is wrong or false. So having asked the question, we then provide what to do if the question evaluates the true. So it happens to be correct. So we put a comma and we put whatever the true happens is. That might be a comment, that might be an actual calculation. Then we put another comma and we put the false section. So what will happen if the evaluation, if the question proves to be negative, proves to be false? So we only ask the one question. It has two possible outcomes, a true or a false. And we action the true and the false commands within the true section and the false section. Hopefully, that's fairly straightforward. Let's see it in action. So in this working file called if, we have the syntax in the syntax sheet, and then in the comment sheet, we have an example where we're going to use the if to effectively pass a comment on these people's ages. So we start with the first person, equals if, open brackets. So our logical test, our evaluation, is going to be if their age, so B2, is greater than 45, comma. If their age is greater than 45, what would we like to happen? We'd like the words getting on a bit to appear. So the words getting on a bit, we actually want that to appear in the cell, so we put them in speech marks. So we open speech marks and we close speech marks at the end of the text string. Then we put a comma to say what will occur if the value is false, i.e. the person is less than or equal to 45. Well, then I'd like to put another set of speech marks, which is quite young. And then close my speech marks and close my bracket for the if statement. So I have one question, two possible outcomes. Return, and we see that Bob is classed as quite young. The if statement is just another formula, so it keeps all of its cell references as relative unless we fix them, which means I can take this if statement and replicate to the bottom of my data. And we see that we have quite a few quite young, and then two getting on a bit, where Barry is 67 and Gaz is 76. So that's one use of the if, to check the contents of a cell and pass comment. I mean, this was more of a bit of fun, but it could be used for comparing cells against the target, to say that you're over target, or you're under target, or you're over budget, or under budget. Another use of an if is actually to hide Excel's error messages. So if we look at the third sheet, hide errors, we have in here three calculations. We have one which is doing C1 divided by D1. We have a second which is doing C2 to the power of D2. And then we have another which is working out the mode, the most frequently occurring number, of a range of numbers. Now everything seems to be working fine until, with the first one, we have nothing to divide by. And we end up with an error message of div 0, cannot divide by 0. It would produce an infinite number and therefore crash the system. Excel, being quite clever, spots that and actually just produces an error message. In the second line, if I remove the 2, which is 2 that's been sent to the power of, we end up with 0 as the result. And if we remove the number that is sent to the power, we end up with hash num. So you actually need a number to be able to make this calculation work, otherwise we get an error message. And the last one, the mode. If we remove one of those 5s and replace it with a 10, then effectively there is no mode, and we end up with another error message. Now the error messages are there for a reason. They're to tell you there's something missing or something remiss in what you're trying to do. However, if you've created this spreadsheet for others to use, the error messages are on the screen at all times, and it might be just that you're waiting for some input, and the error messages print, so they don't look too tidy. So we need a way of effectively negating those error messages. Well, with the div-o, if we revisit the formula, and just change it ever so slightly by using an if. And we'll say, okay, equals if the cell we're trying to divide by, so D1 equals 0, so that's my evaluation, is D1 equal to 0? So am I trying to divide by 0? If so, then all I want to do is write out onto the screen a tiny little hyphen. So instead of div-o, I'm just going to have a little hyphen, comma. The false section is now our C1 divided by D1, because it isn't equal to 0. Therefore, let's go ahead and do the divide. And then we close out brackets at the end, return, and you can see that we get a little hyphen. Come across to D1 and actually divide that 12 by 4, for example, and it goes ahead and works out the result. So we can see that it works. With the hash num, if I say equals if D2 equals 0, then again, we're not having any error messages, thank you, we're putting a little hyphen, comma, the false section goes ahead and does the to power of. Close brackets, and we get a little hyphen. Go ahead and enter some numbers. 4 power of 2, 16. Now our mode one, unfortunately, adds a little extra problem, because we can't go and check every cell to see, are you frequently occurring, are you frequently occurring? So what we're going to do is we're still going to use an if, but we're actually going to ask equals if, is NA the mode of that range? So effectively we're saying, go work out the mode. Is it NA? So is it not applicable? If it is, then again we'll use our little write out hyphen. Now you could actually write out an empty value just by putting an open and a close speech marks, and then nothing gets written into the cell. I'm not a massive fan of that, because it looks like there's nothing in the cell, when in fact there is actually an if statement doing some work. So by getting it to write a little hyphen, people can actually see there is something going on in that cell. So from our evaluation, if it's true, so it's not applicable, they get a little hyphen. However, if it's not true, therefore there is a value being returned, then I need to go ahead and carry out that mode. So it's C3 colon J3. Close the bracket for the mode, and then close the if function bracket. Return, and I get a little hyphen because there is no mode. Let's go make a mode, and the mode works. So that's the if statement. Its syntax is covered. Here, it's a question with two possible outcomes, a true or a false, and we've seen it in action with its ability to be used to add a comment against the value of a cell, or to hide some of the more common Excel error messages.